Welcome to this conversation with Dr. Rene Nassen. We're doing this in a form of an interview in a world that looks and works very differently from the way it did a few months ago because of COVID-19. There are times when we need to think a bit out the box and do things a little differently due to a range of complex factors that we're all negotiating. So, Dr. Nassen, would you like to introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and give us a bit of a sense of the context in which you work?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. So I'm Rene Nassen. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist based in Cape Town, and I work at a child and adolescent mental health service at a psychiatric hospital called Lentegeur Hospital, which is out on the Cape Flats. And I'm also in what is called a joint appointment with the University of Stellenbosch. And that's where I do teaching and research. The patients I serve are people who do not access private healthcare from poor communities surrounding the hospital. And we provide outpatient services, and we also have awards to hospitalize adolescents and children. Thank you.
So from your perspective, what role do you see the arts therapies currently playing within mental health services, and particularly in your specific context?
Sure. Just thinking about mental health in general, and of course, I have much more to say about child mental health, but just reflecting, we are a traumatized people, considering our history. But despite that, music, dance, and creative expression has really been incorporated into our cultural traditions. We are also a nation with a high burden of mental disorders, but with tremendous barriers to accessing mental health services. And particularly it's around language. We have a problem in that many of the therapists that offer talking cures do not speak the language of Indigenous people. The other problem is proximity, access to mental health services within the community. And so unfortunately, these problems really impact on accessing any kind of mental health service. In my context as a child and adolescent psychiatrist and within my unit, and bearing in mind that we all agree that there is a substantial evidence base for these therapies, for the arts therapies, the conventional therapeutic modalities within child mental health services are very much reliant on verbal interaction. So in terms of what the arts therapies would offer, it would really offer a much wider range of emotional processing and exploration, because it offers the opportunity for non-verbal therapeutic engagements, of course. So it's been particularly helpful, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to have access at least to some or other arts therapy for the past 4 years. And it's been very, very helpful for children with a wide range of mental disorders, be it depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly that we've seen it used in our children with autism spectrum disorders, and even with some with psychotic disorders. And as I speak to you, I recall being deeply moved by watching a recording of a music therapy a session with a young boy with the first episode schizophrenia, for example. I've also found in our context that the initial engagement with an arts therapist really lays the foundation for engaging in therapeutic work with a verbal kind of therapeutic engagement with a psychologist particularly, but also with occupational therapy.
And in what ways do you think that the arts therapies can offer empowerment specifically within mental
Mm,
health?
mm. I thought a lot about the word empowerment, and, you know, to start off just thinking about it from the patient's perspective. And again, on the occasion when I have watched a session behind the mirror, not very often, so I always find it to be a deeply a privileged experience in a way. My experience of it is, and just observing it, it's so visceral and so visible in its grace. For me, it's a beautiful thing to watch because it incorporates all the senses, and there seems to be an immediacy in terms of its impact. And there is such an invitation to participate, and I just marvel at how readily, for example, adolescents would engage, whereas the average adolescent does not want to engage in a therapeutic engagement. And thinking about this, I remember in the ward round that I ran on Thursday morning, and speaking about a young woman, young girl who is recovering from depression. She became psychotic, and she's got quite a significant trauma history. And she was given the good news that she will be going home next week. And it was so wonderful to hear her saying, reflecting on the drama therapy session that she's been receiving. And she said, I've discovered my hidden talents, talents that I didn't know I ever had. And then remembering again a young man, 17-year-old with severe depression, several suicide attempts, with traits of autism. And I'm deliberately mentioning these diagnoses so that you can see that we're dealing with a severe end of mental disorders. And he was invited to find, he said he found his voice because he could choose a favorite animal, which was a lion, and he was given permission to growl, and to growl repeatedly. And he later on said, after he started to feel less suicidal, that the sessions made him feel alive again, that he could feel the feeling of being alive and not wanting to die. And of course, there's the incorporation of stories and the invitation to enact these themes. And so many of the adolescents would say, I feel that something was released. So that's just a very vivid description of what has been experienced in the unit. And I have no doubt that the patients have been empowered in many, many ways that we can't even imagine. But if I think about the therapists themselves, I think that there is a great opportunity for empowerment of the arts therapists who have been invited into formal clinical environments, such as the one that I run. I don't think that it is common. It does happen in some settings for arts therapists to become parts of multidisciplinary teams within psychiatric units. And to see them working alongside the multidisciplinary teams, joining the ward rounds, being part of the management plans, I think is an opportunity for empowerment, because speaking with them, they always describe their lives and existence, their professional existence, as being quite solitary. And I think that that's a great opportunity and skill set almost to develop. Yeah.
And do you also feel like other members of the multidisciplinary team in their interaction with arts therapists could find some experiences as well that could be empowering for them too?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I wish that this interview could happen with the rest of my team, and so that, you know, it could be observed how wonderfully the treatment plans are discussed, and how it is planned for when the psychologist would get involved, and when the arts therapist, and what each one does. And certainly, and I speak for all of them to say that we've become quite dependent on the presence of an arts therapist in our team. We've been lucky. It's been 4 years now.
How would you describe patients' access to the arts therapies in the South African mental health context?
I was thinking that I should divide this answer into kind of speaking about the public sector, the private sector, and maybe the NPO sector. And if I think about the public sector, that is the context in which I work. I really think, and it's true, it's not what I think, it's true, that except for access to the arts therapy interns, it is minimal to non-existent in the public sector. And this is not likely to improve unless there is some commitment to funding and creating public sector posts. But as I said, there's plenty of enthusiasm and support among mental health practitioners across the board for inviting arts therapists into our spaces. The private sector is a little bit better, but I don't know enough about it. But as you know, I asked you whether health funders, medical aids pay for arts therapists, and they do. And so, yes, there is better access in the private sector, but the private sector constitutes a small percentage of all people in this country who need and deserve access to arts therapists. And then there are the few NPOs here and there, like, for example, in Cape Town, Music Works, who would do community-based work. But that, again, is so little in relation to what is needed. In my context, speaking about access, we were quite conscious and deliberate in our need to have the arts therapist in the unit that I had. And myself and a psychologist created what we called a creative arts program in 2016. I was lucky enough to be offered funding by a benefactor who was impressed with the work that we did. And she actually came to watch us do a presentation at another conference. And so for 2 years, we actually had a music and an art therapist as part of our team. It was a great success, it goes without saying, and we could carry on for a third year with some other external funding for a part-time music therapist. Last year, we hosted our first Wits University drama therapy intern, and over the years, on and off, we've always hosted music therapy interns. Unfortunately, this year, we are relying on this drama therapy therapist to volunteer in our service. We're very grateful for it, but we actually have run out of any sort of funding. And so we are constantly under threat that our arts program may actually cease, sadly.
You're mentioning funding, and obviously that's a key component to access.
Absolutely.
Are there any other challenges that you'd like to highlight in terms of struggle to access arts therapies in the South African mental health context?
Yeah, and again, just speaking in general terms about mental health, I mean, I think it would be important to say that there are significant challenges that people with mental disorders face, and then huge challenges in accessing mental health care. And then with child mental health, it is even worse. We follow the worldwide trend in being under-resourced, especially with poor to very limited community-based mental health care, as I said. And in the case of children who access community-based services, that which there is, it's not child-friendly, and so they readily drop out. And there are also many socioeconomic barriers to the mentally ill. And so we really need to think about what are going to be the affordable and effective therapies that could be delivered that will cross the racial barrier. In the context of children, what is vitally important is early identification and intervention. But there are all sorts of reasons why this doesn't happen. And so these young people arrive late in an acute setting as teenagers, whereas they've had a mental disorder probably for about 5-6 years before they present. In terms of the challenges, there is a huge lack of awareness, I think, on the part of patients and healthcare managers. And this is because there is a lack of visibility of the arts therapies. And my question really is, could it be, and it might be, because the arts therapy community is quite small, or is it that they're fragmented? I always think of art therapy, music therapy, drama therapy. Do you operate as a collective, or are you quite fragmented? I don't know enough about it, but this could amplify the limited visibility and opportunity to showcase or demonstrate the impact of your work and the evidence base. Then I think there are some power issues and the relative dominance of the conventional disciplines such as psychology and maybe occupational therapy. So I'm also wondering, I'm thinking I'm asking you questions rather than answering, but what are the linkages there, if any? And then there is this big issue that posts for arts therapies do not exist. And so despite the substantive body of evidence, and despite the fact that arts therapists need to register with the Health Professions Council in South Africa, in the health department, music and other arts therapies are not so-called designated professions. And because of that, there are no funded posts in any public health facility in the country. So there are political and funding constraints, and I believe that the two are linked. And it will require a review of existing posts and the creation of arts therapist posts rather than in addition to. And it doesn't seem to be that there's much of an appetite for this. And likely there will be a huge backlash from the conventional disciplines unless you befriend them and unless, we find a different way of interacting with each other. I'm beginning to feel quite depressed as I list all of these challenges. But anyway, that's what I think, is there. It's evident sometimes, with some of the colleagues, especially the senior colleagues, actually. Yeah.
I think what's positive is in the last year, 18 months, is the real rejuvenation and redesign of SANATA, the South African National Arts Therapies Association. And you're right that we were sort of in separate silos to a degree, but now we've really come together as a stronger, more unified force across the different arts therapies modality. And so in terms of advocacy and collaboration, there's wonderful renewed energy now. And I think, just like you point out, that's exactly what we need in our pursuit to befriend and navigate a complex political system. And so I think there's a lot of hope on that horizon. What hopes do you have for moving towards a situation where access to arts therapies in South African mental health services could be enhanced? I know you say sometimes you feel quite discouraged, but if you could let yourself dream and hope, what would some of those hopes be?
Well, I don't give up. That's the thing. So I hope that I have the energy to continue, because I'm one of the few who is convinced. But in this context of current and historical trauma and under-resourcing of mental health, we've got to continue to promote the place of arts therapies as a vehicle of emotional expression, of catharsis, and even of protest and meaning and of ritual. But how? So the issue is it's invisible or not visible enough. There's no light shone on the magic that I witness and what I'm exposed to in the work done by the arts therapists in my unit. But it should be. So how does one go forward? And of course, and I'm sure this is such a hackneyed term, but the issue of lobbying to raise awareness, advocacy of children's health, maybe children's mental health is a powerful vehicle to simultaneously raise awareness and advocate for holistic approaches to mental health interventions. So I think there is an opportunity there. On the other side, the arts therapies and child mental health, they're both relatively small disciplines. So what we both need is advocacy on a large scale. For example, little things I've done, a couple of years ago, I decided to ask an artist to create a logo called Children's Mental Health Matters. And in the hope that this would increase visibility. And it went some way. We even got T-shirts going, and we used the logo at conferences, and it went onto our letterheads, but it didn't go as far as I hoped it would. If one looks at new opportunities, there are new opportunities in light of this COVID-19 pandemic, sadly, sad to say, to advocate and to give inputs to the redesign of child mental health services. Because the inequities in mental health services, particularly child mental health services, has been highlighted during this pandemic. And I have been extremely busy trying to fend off a huge demand in the face of how little we have to offer. And so in this regard, we have finally gained the attention of the senior managers in the Western Cape Department of Health. And there's been a promise and an offer for, to receive a proposal from a senior child psychiatrist for a redesign of an improved child mental health service. Now, what we could do potentially is to include a mandatory requirement for the arts therapies as part of the menu of therapeutic services required. And so that is my undertaking and promise that I will certainly do that. If I look at my context at the hospital, the issue of creating a post, there was an agreement to create a post 2-3 years ago with our previous CEO. So we went some way to starting the process, and then he resigned. But on a positive note, I've gotten an exposure to what is required. And it's quite a bureaucratic process because you've got to do benchmarking, you've got to look at salary scales, you've got to create a job description. And so we've done some of the work. Unfortunately, we kind of lost momentum, but I feel quite confident that I'll be able to pick this up again with a new CEO. The funding model was going to be to use unfilled posts and to actually create the post that way, because that's going to be how it will have to be done. And then just lastly, there should be a national effort, collective effort, and programs to create, to promote and play music and creative arts as healing modalities. Not to get the feeble user voice mobilized. How are we going to do this? So my question is, could the Congress be the means by which to leverage greater visibility and to advocate more intensely and visibly? And I think, again, repeating myself, those providing the services are convinced and would welcome the arts therapists into their workplaces. So the battle needs to be a hearts and minds one, a political one, directed at funders, at policymakers, and at senior health managers. It is about shifting of attitude, as that is a profoundly disabling factor which will retard and subvert any advocacy initiative. So the opportunity that this conference provides is to present the evidence, engage in a scientific exchange, but also to present this urgent agenda to the population at large. And I believe that when they see it, they will understand. This sentence, I think, is a line from a song by Coldplay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nassen. You're a real warrior, and we've appreciated your support and advocacy, and just feels like you're a friend to the arts therapies, and we really just appreciate and value you. And thank you for your time today and all your insights. I know it seems like a mountain to climb, but you also bring a sense of resilience and creativity and passion to the task that's at hand. And as much as you identify the challenges, I also feel inspired listening to you. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You.